Again, welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature. I'm your host, Brooke Mitchell, and today's webinar is Explore Arctic Wilderness and Culture in East Greenland, presented by Nat Hab Expedition Leader Anthony Amsel. Thank you so much for being here today, Anthony. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Brooke. Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're tuning in from. I am very excited today because I get to explore the Arctic wilderness and culture in East Greenland with all of you. This expedition is probably unlike any other in the repertoire of the itineraries that Natural Habitat Adventure has. It is incredibly remote, it's incredibly wild, as the name implies, and it is one of my absolute favorite because in many different ways, it is what defines the term expedition in terms of its mentality, in terms of the landscape itself, the people that we encounter. It is very much a special, special place. So without further ado, how about we dive right on in? As Brooke mentioned, my name is Anthony Amsel. I am an expedition leader and photo expedition leader with Natural Habitat Adventures. I primarily tend to focus on northern parts of the world, as you can see in this wonderful image that was taken very much in East Greenland, not too far away from our base camp. I also lead trips up in Churchill, Manitoba with polar bears and with northern lights, as well as in the Pacific Northwest. As you can see, the cold is very much in my blood. I am Canadian after all. So this is very much a special place for me. I'm also a wildlife biologist before really diving into the world of expeditioning. That was my first hat, my first love, and it continues to be. Animals and the natural world are very much something that has led me to where I am, and I could not be where I am without that. I primarily have worked with many of the iconic kind of animals that we may or may not see on these trips, specifically marine mammals, whales. I've had the very wonderful luxury of working with humpback whales, blue whales, and everything in between, even much smaller cetaceans such as harbor porpoises. I've also worked with bears, with wolves, and with reptiles and amphibians, one of the few animals that you will not find in Greenland. I'm also a photographer, of course. It's hard not to go somewhere without a camera nowadays. And given this lifestyle, I have many opportunities to kind of, take my lens and snap a couple pictures and make some beautiful stories to share not only with our wonderful, wonderful travelers, but with people around the world. Now that you know a little bit about me, let's dive more into Greenland and what this expedition is all about. Now, as most of you know, Greenland is this wonderful, wonderful big piece of land, largest island in the world, very much at the north. You can see it goes far beyond the reaches of northern Canada. You'll also notice that it dwarfs Iceland and many other little areas around it. It obviously has a massive, massive ice sheet, arguably one of the biggest in the world, that very white spot that you see that kind of characterizes the central part of the island. Now, of course, this means that ice is very much a predominant theme of this expedition, whether we're talking about glacier ice, whether or not we're talking about sea ice, and everything in between. You'll see it at every point during this trip once we get to Greenland. It also has very vast expanses of mountains, as you can see. The beautiful picture on the bottom left is one of the valleys that we see near base camp. But of course, Greenland isn't just about the vast expanse. It's not just about the remoteness, the isolation. It is also very much steeped in history. Now, of course, the Inuits and their ancestors and descendants have been roaming Greenland for thousands and thousands of years. It is a very deep, a very rich culture. Even though it is a very stark landscape, human beings have been able to not only survive, but very much thrive on this landscape for a very, very long time, for many generations. And we were lucky enough on this expedition to very much find a balance between all three of these things: the ice, the landscapes, and of course, the wonderful culture that is the Greenlandic people. However, we do need to backpedal for just a moment because our journey actually starts in Iceland. Of course, this is the meeting place for the beginning of the Greenland expedition. So we meet very much in Reykjavik, which is the capital city of Iceland. It is also where most of the Icelandic people live. Of course, this is where we meet you for our welcome dinner, where we really get into that expedition mentality. And before flying out to Greenland, we actually spend half a day kind of getting a little bit of a preview of what Iceland has to offer. This is very much because of how the airlines work. The only flight that we can actually take from Iceland to Greenland is in the late afternoon. Of course, sometimes there are little modifications, but generally speaking, what we do is head out from Reykjavik, go explore some of the southern part of the peninsula that is right next to Reykjavik. And as you can see in these pictures, it is very typically Icelandic landscape. We have wonderful little lava tunnels that we get to see. We have mud pots. We have, of course, birding life, which is all around Iceland. And we do get to explore a little bit of what Iceland has to offer before we make our way to Greenland. Now, once our little kind of mini journey takes end, we head to the airport. And of course, we head to Greenland, specifically the little slice of paradise in the red square in the southeast of the country. Now, of course, it'd be amazing to explore all of the island, but that would take weeks and weeks and weeks. And if you think about the first settlers who arrived there, even longer perhaps. But of course, we get a wonderful, wonderful opportunity to explore a part of Greenland that is not well known to outsiders. The particularity about East Greenland, and one of the reasons I love this expedition so much, is because we generally tend to go where the humans are not. Now, most people, if they have been to Greenland in the past, will probably have been to Nuuk, which is in the northwest part of the country. It is the capital of Greenland. Or they may have arrived by ship as well, going up and down the coast. We have the luxury of being able to very much call that little slice of paradise home for multiple days and explore the very remote area that is East Greenland. Specifically, there are a couple of little towns that we will not only explore, but we will reside in. So the first one is Kulusuk. The wonderful little town of Kulusuk is actually where we fly into. As you can see, it isn't very big, of course, and the airfield is just outside the town. That little blue building that you see at the bottom of your screen is actually Hotel Kulusuk, where we stay on the very last night in Greenland. So, of course, we're jumping a little bit ahead, but that is where we land. And once we land in Kulusuk, we don't stay there for very long. Once we get off the plane, we actually take a helicopter ride or a boat ride, depending on the conditions, of course, and we make our way to Tasiilaq. By the way, the pronunciation of words in Greenland is very interesting because there are three main dialects. So depending on who you're talking to, and depending on where they're from, the pronunciations may be a little bit different. I very much hope that if there are any Greenlanders listening right now, that I'm not butchering the names too much. It is something that I love every year when I go back, is learning different types of pronunciations. But I digress. So once we arrive in Tasiilaq, we actually stay at Hotel Massalik, which is this beautiful building that overviews the entire town. And that is the town that you see before you. So we arrive in Greenland, we spend our first night at Hotel Massalik, and the following day we actually do explore town. We have a wonderful local guide who's there to help us a little bit, and then we make our way through town, learning a little bit more about the history, about the culture of Greenland, of course, making our way into one of the valleys where we have a beautiful hike that awaits you to be able to view all the wonderful little wildflowers and really get a sense of place of where we are. The next town that's worth mentioning is Tinit. This is a very remote, small town. As you can see, it's quite far away from Kulusuk and from Tasiilaq. It is the closest town to base camp. Now, a town is maybe an exaggeration because it is actually a place that has roughly 53 people on a good day. Those numbers can vary depending on the seasons, depending on what's happening in terms of hunting and all of that good stuff and fishing. But it is one that we will pass by most every day when we take the Zodiacs out from base camp to head into the fjord system. Because as you can see on the left-hand side of the map, there are many, many, many fjords. The one that is most noteworthy is the Surmulek Fjord, which we spend a lot of time in and we explore quite extensively, depending, of course, on the sea ice conditions. Surmulek meaning, depending on the dialect, the place of big ice, which is very appropriate because, of course, there's so many massive, towering, town dwarfing icebergs all around, and you'll see lots and lots and lots of ice. But of course, our main home, our main hub for the duration of this expedition is the wonderful Nat Hab Greenland base camp, which is nestled in this beautiful, gorgeous valley that really kind of helps us understand what it's like to live in Greenland and what perhaps it would have been like to live generations ago. Now, life at base camp is actually quite comfortable. It's one of the perks, of course, of traveling with Nat Hab is we make sure that everyone is very, very happy and comfortable. As you can see on the left-hand side, those are some of the lodging that you will stay in. So we have these beautifully comfortable beds. Of course, there are two beds to each safari style tent, and that door that you see leads to a private bathroom for every single tent. Now, of course, these are not your typical bathrooms with plumbing. Of course, these are different types. Those are things that we get into once we arrive at base camp because, of course, there are particularities about living at a base camp in the middle of nowhere. But the most important thing, of course, is that it is very comfortable. There is heat at night. Yes, of course, you will not freeze. We make sure of that. There are extra blankets in case anybody needs, and everyone seems to really enjoy their tiny little nook. And on the right-hand side, you'll see the main dining hall, which is where we have every single number of meals, breakfast, lunch, dinner, and dare I say, some of the best food that I have had anywhere on this planet. The chefs and assistant chefs who work in this place are so unbelievably dedicated to presenting not only nourishing food, but delicious, delicious food and some recipes that you may not expect. This year we have Kevin, who is an unbelievable chef who will be there with us. I have had the beautiful opportunity to work with him actually in Haida Gwaii on our Haida Gwaii sailing trips. And his food is unbelievable. So I'm very excited that we have him on our staff this year. And of course, the camp staff in themselves are just absolutely amazing. Now, apart, of course, from just your rooms and the dining hall, base camp itself offers so many different beautiful places to kind of relax, unwind, recharge, and really enjoy what it is to be in Greenland. Of course, we have the Explorers Yurt, which is this wonderful little area where we can have happy hour or we can have presentations in the evening. Or, of course, if you want to just wind down and read a book, it's a beautiful spot that is very comfortable and, of course, very much nestled in the valley, allowing for stunning views no matter what time of day it is. We have our unbelievable staff, which I mentioned. Of course, we have our cooks, we have our assistant cooks, we have our camp manager who is there, as well as our hospitality and our field operations coordinator. Everyone who is there is so dedicated to ensuring that everyone has an unbelievable time at base camp. In fact, they are there very much from the beginning of the season to the very end. So yes, indeed, they spend their whole summer there. Even though it is a very short window in Greenland, of course, they are dedicated to the point where they ensure that they sleep there every single day and make sure that everything runs very smoothly. So when we're there, of course, they become part of the family. So when we're in Greenland, of course, there is the expedition leader, the other expedition leader, because of course we have two of them, but there's also an unbelievable camp staff that will be there to help you whatever your needs are. Now, you might be wondering, of course, how do we get to all of these lovely places and how do we get around in Greenland? There are different ways that we do that. The first one, of course, is flying in style. So once we leave Iceland, we take a Dash 8 or a similar plane from the Reykjavik area all the way to Greenland. So, of course, we're talking about a double propeller plane that has very stunning views. And as I mentioned, once we get to Kulusuk, generally speaking, most of the time, of course, we will take a helicopter very much from Kulusuk to Tasiilaq. The helicopter that you see in the above left-hand corner is the typical type of helicopter that we take. It generally fits everybody. Sometimes we need to split the group up depending on what's going on. That's again why you have two expedition leaders to make sure that you always have someone with you at all times. Now, of course, flying into Kulusuk is an interesting place. And what I mean by that is it is very much a small airfield and weather conditions can change very, very quickly. When I mention the fact that this is, of course, one of the most remote and wild expeditions that we feel it very much from the very, very beginning of this trip. Depending on weather conditions, sometimes flights can be delayed a little bit, sometimes they can change, but of course, we make sure that we get you there. And that's the particularity about Greenland. You have to work for it in the best kind of way. Once you leave Greenland, you realize what that expedition mentality is all about. But as you can see with everybody's happy faces there, regardless of how we get there and we are so, so happy to be in this unbelievable place in the world. Other means of transportation, of course, are boats and zodiacs. We take a variety of different boats depending on what is available, where we're going, and what activities we're doing. Generally speaking, when we leave Tasiilaq to head to base camp, we're on somewhat a larger vessel. Of course, we're not talking about anything like a big cruise ship or anything like that. We're talking on about a boat that has, a nice deck that we typically can get out and observe, for example, if there are any whales around or any glaciers or anything like that. However, most of the time when we're traveling from base camp to anywhere else, we're in these beautiful zodiacs that are very, very large and comfortable. We always take two out, of course, depending on the size of the group, to ensure that everybody is very comfortable and has as much space as possible for observing, but also for transportation. Now, keeping in mind, we are in Greenland. We're surrounded by ice. We're surrounded by very cold water, which is why we have those beautiful survival suits that you see, the very orange, flashy ones. They're orange for a reason. That way we can spot you wherever you are. But more importantly, those are survival suits that will keep you nice and warm. So whenever we're traveling anywhere, we very much throw those on because sometimes those Zodiac rides can be quite long. They can be anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes, sometimes upwards to an hour, hour and a half. It very much depends on where we're going. And that in itself is determined by the weather, by the conditions on the sea, and of course, by the ice. Sturmlich Fjord, again, the place of large ice, really does mean that when we're navigating, it's never the same route. Depending on that day and depending on what's happening with the ice, we have to be very careful to ensure safety first. Of course, that is our paramount responsibility. And in doing so, it means that sometimes we don't maneuver very quickly. It is called a maze of ice for a reason. But those zodiacs are comfortable to be in. Of course, we sit on the edge. And like I said, it can be cold, it can take a while, but those suits are made as such to make sure that everyone's nice and warm. Sometimes we take little taxi boats like right in the middle there if we need to go from one place to another. Of course, no survival suits needed for that. We have an indoor enclosure, of course. And then very much it depends on the day. It depends on what's going on. And you're going to see that this is a common theme. The word it depends is very much at the top of every expedition leader's list because there is no typical day in base camp Greenland, as you're going to see momentarily. Of course, another means of transportation is paddling. Probably one of my favorite ways to experience Greenland. The rhythm very much slows, and being around these monoliths, these massive mountains and very, very big ice, you feel very small in this area. It's such a special way to discover Greenland because you can hear the ice cracking, you can hear the wind howling through the mountains. And sometimes, if we're lucky, of course, we might even hear the beautiful sound of a whale's blow. Of course, that very depends on what's going on with the animals in the area and what is happening with the whales in terms of their behavior. But it's not uncommon to hear a blow or two, whether we're on the boats or in the kayaks themselves. The kayaks are very, very comfortable, very sturdy. And of course, all of these different activities are always voluntary. If you want to paddle, you're more than welcome to. If you don't, we always have the option to have you in the Zodiac because we have safety Zodiacs with us at all times when we're on the water in case anything was to arise, which generally is not the case. And as you can see by the happy smiles, people do love being in these boats. They love the paddling. The rhythm is very easy. We very much go at the group's rhythm. And we don't go into the kayaks if the seas are rough, of course. That is not the point of going out in this. It's really to enjoy the scenery, to enjoy the landscape, and feel a little bit more part of Greenland. Of course, hiking, we have to use those legs. We have to get in a little bit of exercise from time to time, do we not? And hiking is, of course, one of the other great ways of immersing yourself into this landscape. Whether it is walking through a valley, whether it's walking on the coast or walking on the glacier, there's so many different ways to just kind of go experience this on your own two legs. Now, of course, this comes with a couple of different requirements. The hiking trails that we take are by no means climbing Everest, of course. However, it is very uneven terrain. It can be slippery. And of course, because we're in the middle of nowhere, if it does rain, there is no cover, which is why that packing list becomes so incredibly important. We want to make sure that we have layers, that we have waterproof layers, especially in case the weather can change, because it does change very, very, very quickly. The hikes that we do are, of course, dependent on what we want to see that day, what the conditions are, and what is offered to us by Greenland and its different accessibility. But regardless, of course, the aim is always to discover new and uncharted parts of our little area, our little slice of heaven. As you can see by everyone in these pictures, everyone does love the hikes that we do. And they can be anywhere from an hour to an hour and a half or 2 or 3, depending on what's going on that day and how the group is feeling. Of course, because we have 2 expedition leaders, safety is always an important thing to us. Of course, polar bears are in Greenland. It is not our hope to see one, however. We don't want to see one on land. It is not the goal of this trip. If you want to see polar bears, Churchill is the place to go in the fall. It's very much where we emphasize those types of observations. But in Greenland, what we're really trying to explore here is just the rugged, beautiful, beautiful landscapes that we see around us. And again, that ice, as you can see, is such an important theme. Sometimes we keep our survival suits when we get off of the zodiacs because it's cold and it's raining and everyone wants to stay nice and warm and toasty. But as you can see, it does not detract from any of the pleasurable time that we have out on the landscape. Sometimes, of course, we're going and we'll be walking on glaciers. And what that is, again, we're not walking there on snowshoes or on our regular shoes. We have crampons, which are, of course, spikes that we put underneath our shoes. We have wonderful mountain guides who are with us and assist us for that day. It's a comfortable walk. It can be quite an exertion, however, for certain people who are not used to walking on that type of terrain or walking with spikes underneath their feet. Sometimes it can be a little demanding, but usually, again, we go very slowly. It's nice. It's nice to really take our time. We don't want to rush, especially because we're walking on ice. But regardless of where we go, there's so many things to see and so much to do. Of course, that also means that we want to talk about wildlife. It's often on people's minds. This is not a wildlife centric trip. And what I mean by that is, of course, there will be certain usual suspects who are out and about, either flying in the air, swimming in the water, or running around on land. However, it is not the main theme. Again, the landscape, the ruggedness, the remoteness is really what you want to see and what you want to experience. However, there, as I mentioned, there are certain usual suspects who might be out and about. Whales are usually on the top of most people's lists. Of course, we do take boats and we take zodiacs every day, so there always is an opportunity to see some of those whales in the waters. Some of the usual species that we'll see there are humpback whales, as you see that are photographed here in the slide. There's also the potential to see fin whales, maybe minke whales, on a very rare occurrence, perhaps even some sperm whales. I have not seen them myself. I know that they've been seen in previous years, but I have not had that chance just yet in Greenland. Now, of course, beyond just whales, there are also marine mammals, such as that beautiful harbor seal that we see on the bottom right-hand side that's just basking and laying down on the rock. As we navigate the waters of Greenland, we're always hoping to see any of those wonderful seals out and about. Sometimes they're just basking on the ice, taking a break from their very frigid swims in the very cold waters of Greenland. And of course, there are birds. Now, the top picture is very much that of a raven, which happens to be my favorite bird in the world. And you will often see ravens out and about in Greenland. They are such unbelievably skilled masters of remote areas. Now, beyond ravens, we have other little birds that you might encounter, such as the snow bunting, which is a tiny, hardy bird of the Arctic and the northern climates. So we always keep our binoculars with us just in case, because you never know who's flying about. Beyond that, of course, there's the potential to see Arctic fox. Now, we really do need to have keen eyes and keep our eyes on the prize for that, because they are elusive little creatures. It's always an excitement when we're able to see them. But again, we don't typically get to see them all that often because it is such a remote place. Imagine having to survive and thrive there. We talked about how the Inuit, their ancestors and descendants, have been able to do it on so many different levels. And of course, these animals do it as well, but they have so many different adaptations that have allowed them to be able to just be very elusive and cryptic. So what I'm trying to say here is keep your eyes peeled, because you never know what you're going to see. But generally speaking, wildlife can be sparse throughout the day. Plant life, on the other hand, is very abundant in the part of Greenland that we explore. Now, this often comes to as a surprise to a lot of people because, of course, we think about the ice and we think about the rock, but the Arctic and subarctic are unbelievable places for wildflowers, especially. On top of that, we do have some mosses and some lichens that we definitely get into when we're out there because they are so fun to talk about. But depending on when you're in Greenland throughout our Nat Hab season, you will definitely see a different array of colors, whether that is the yellows, and the purples or the pink, for example, of this moss campion. They do have these beautiful little flowers that you see all over the place, or perhaps cotton grass. There is a hike that we do when we're in the Sea Lac called the Valley of the Flowers, and it is called as such because it is the best place to see all of these blooms happening throughout the summertime. Keeping in mind that summer in Greenland is quite short indeed. Now, beyond flowers, we have to keep in mind, of course, that these beautiful, beautiful colors attract certain tiny little creatures. We're talking about bugs. We can't talk about Greenland without talking about insects. Now, there aren't swarms and swarms of them like you might expect in certain wetlands or other areas like that. However, there can be midges, there can be little biting insects, which is why, of course, we have these bug nets. Are they around every corner? No, not necessarily. Sometimes we'll go days without seeing them. Sometimes, if the conditions are right or wrong, depending on your perspective, there might be clouds of them. Regardless of where we go, there's an opportunity for them, which is why we always have those bug nets available for everybody. And as you can see, just like the survival suits and all the other equipment, bug nets do not detract from the sheer amusement of being in Greenland. It's all part of the experience, it's part of the ecosystem, especially. It allows the birds to be there, it allows all the other animals to be there. So we are actually quite thankful that there are bugs and insects in Greenland. Now, we talked about survival and we talked about thriving, and I keep going back to the wonderful, wonderful Greenlandic people who have lived on this beautiful, beautiful island for such a long, long, long time. Now, cultural encounters become such an essential part of our dialect when we get out to Greenland because, of course, it is vast, it is remote, but it is so much ingrained in the fabric that is Greenland. We have the opportunity when we're there to have local guides who have lived in Greenland their whole life. We have the opportunity to meet people in Tasiilaq or in Kulusuk, of course, who have called Greenland their homes for generations and generations. And it is such a vibrant, vibrant culture and one that we're so incredibly passionate about sharing with everybody, whether it is in some of the museums, whether it's some of the people that we invite to come as entertainers, whether it's some of the people we meet in the villages. It becomes such an important piece of the puzzle that is this beautiful expedition. Now, weather and climate is always on everybody's mind, and I've already mentioned it a little bit, but I do need to emphasize the importance of being ready for anything. And this is where the expedition mentality really comes in. We have so many beautiful days in Greenland, regardless of what the climate and the weather is doing. However, we do need to be prepared. We talked about layering and how important that is because you can go from having a bluebird day, a very, very sunny day, to within a couple of hours, a torrential downpour coming in. It is just the nature of the beast when we're in Greenland because we have all of these little micro ecosystems. Of course, the ice, the ocean also impacts those weather systems so predominantly that you can end up having a fog front that comes in out of nowhere, which means that, of course, we change our plans. But that's why we always have different strategies. Your expedition leaders have been there for several years. We work with our camp staff, we work with our local guides to come up with so many different strategies to ensure that regardless of what the weather and the climate is doing, we maximize any opportunity to be out on the land, to see wildlife, but most importantly, to have a good time. And as you can see in one of these pictures on the central left-hand side, it doesn't matter what the weather is doing. In fact, last year, Colby, Brokvist, and myself were co-guiding a trip, and we ended up having some interesting weather, to say the least. Some gale force winds, and myself, Colby, and the rest of the group were very keen to experience this unbelievable weather phenomenon that came on through. So we all went out, we all put on our layers, we all got soaking wet, and it was so much fun to actually just stay standing up straight in these unbelievable winds. Of course, no one was forced to do this. Some people definitely stayed inside where it was warm and cozy with a nice mug of hot chocolate and probably pointed and laughed at us a little bit, but we definitely had the time of our life. But of course, as you can see, one of the most amazing things about Iceland is the amount of sun and light that we get. It is one of the lands of the eternal sunshine in the summer. My first year, it was very kind of eerie when I had to wake up at 2 in the morning to go use the facilities because you walk out and there's still some sunshine. Of course, this varies from the beginning to the end of the Nat Hab season, of course. Given the fact that we are in very northern latitudes, the sunshine will change dramatically from the beginning of the season to the end of the season. But generally speaking, even when you're going to sleep at night, there is still some sunlight. that is in and around the area. So it's such a great opportunity to kind of experience a different land that almost doesn't have a sunset most of the summer. Um, I also talked about zodiacs quite a bit, and I do want to emphasize the zodiacs that we take out are so well adorned and well equipped for the type of landscape that we're in, especially on the water. Getting in and out of them can be interesting for certain people. Those survival suits that you see are very much akin to onesies. So you slip them on, you keep them on while you're out in the water, of course, because they're nice and warm and cozy. And again, they're called survival suits for a reason. But it can be tricky getting into the zodiacs, of course, because we don't have a dock, we don't have anything like that. We really walk right off the rocks directly into the zodiacs. There's a particular way to get into them, and of course, whether it is the local guide or it is one of your expedition leaders, someone is always there to help you in and out of them. For certain people who have mobility issues, sometimes it can take a little bit more time to get in or out, but that's okay. We go at the rhythm of the group, of course. And that's one of the particularities about this place is when we're driving around these zodiacs, we're not going from one marina to another. We're really doing what we call wild landings, which means that we find the most appropriate and suitable place to get out of the zodiacs. And then from there, we walk out. Depending on our activity, we'll take our survival suits off, put on our raincoats or our windbreakers or just a t-shirt. Sometimes it's warm enough to do that and carry on with our activity. Sometimes we get out of the zodiac, and because we're only there for a short amount of time, we keep their survival suits on. But very much this is a rugged environment. Generally speaking, we're not stepping off to a comfortable flat dock. We're getting off onto rocky, sometimes slippery terrain, which again is why it's so important to have those expedition leaders and those local guides there to help everyone in and out. Now, we're setting up kind of this interesting equation. We've talked about weather and climate, we've talked about wildlife, we've talked about how we're getting around. So I thought it'd be interesting to talk a little bit about a day in the life at base camp, which, as you can note right here, is far from typical. We have to keep in mind that this is kind of a glimpse into what a relatively rough day is from and in base camp, but that can change so quickly. Generally speaking, in the morning, you'll wake up and head to the dining hall where breakfast will be waiting for you, and you'll be accompanied not only by delicious food, but of course, the warm smiles of our wonderful base camp staff. We have different types of breakfast from day to day, of course, depending on people's dietaries and what is available, but every single time it is warm, it is filling, and it is nutritious. Once everyone has filled up their bellies and is ready for the day, we get on our survival suits and get into the zodiacs, as you can see here in the middle image. That's very much the typical kind of way that we get into our zodiacs from base camp. Again, no docks, no marinas, right off the rocks, right into the boats. And then we set sail, in a matter of speaking, in these wonderful boats, whether that means navigating through the ice, going on land, or anything else. Our activities are very much dependent on the weather and what is happening with the sea ice. Now, depending, of course, on those conditions, we can either go for a wonderful paddle or we can go hiking into the wonderful unknown that is Greenland, or even explore and have fun on the ice. Again, this will change from day to day. We typically run through all these different activities from the moment we get to base camp until we leave, of course. And if people are feeling like they'd rather just hang out at base camp, there's also that opportunity to do so. Of course, these activities are not mandatory. It can be quite demanding and quite taxing to be in Greenland for some people, especially for those of you who have never been to that climate. It can be cold, it can be wet, there can be a lot of humidity. Sometimes, people just need an extra afternoon to just recharge, and there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. We want to make sure everyone is nice, happy, and comfortable. So whether you're in the kayak, pardon me, whether you're hiking on the ice or at base camp, there's always something for you to do. Now, once our daily activities are done, we'll head back to base camp where we have our usual happy hour. It is one of my favorite moments of the day because after a wonderful excursion on the water, on land, or on ice, we head back, we go to the yurt, we all kind of have our debrief of the day. We always have some wonderful little bites waiting for us because, of course, the camp staff want to make sure that we're always having the fuel we need to get us where we need to go. Perhaps partake in a little drink, whether that is some tea, some coffee, something warm, or something else. Then, of course, we head back to the dining hall. We start our day with food. We also have to end it with food. So that's where we have dinner, of course. And I cannot emphasize enough how the food is unbelievably delicious at this base camp. Now, after dinner, of course, there's the opportunity for people to just either go to bed after a very long day out on the land or really just enjoy the base camp. There is an electric fence, of course, around base camp because we make sure that if there was to be a polar bear that was around, we want to make sure everyone is nice and safe. So, of course, people can't leave the premises too much. However, we make sure that that electric fence is only activated at night when everyone is sleeping. So we wait until the last person is ready to go to bed or just about. But there's so many opportunities, whether it's in your yurt, whether it is in front of your safari tent. There are some very nice, comfortable lounging chairs to really just appreciate and enjoy the landscape that you're in. Now, we've talked a lot about the nature journey side of this expedition, but we also want to talk a little bit about the photography expeditions. In essence, both the nature journeys and the photography expeditions work very similarly in terms of logistics, in terms, of course, of transportation, in terms of the different activities that we're doing. One of the main differences, however, is that, of course, we're thinking a little bit more about the types of shots that we want to take. We're thinking about the lighting. So if the lighting happens to be really, really good in the evening, we'll make sure that, we have a workshop going to allow people to get the best shots that they want. When we're out in the land, of course, we're thinking about the different landscapes, the ice that we want to do. So instead of, for example, just going straight from base camp to one of our landing sites to go hike, we might take a little bit more time on the water if we see that there's some really nice ice that's happening, if the lighting is really good. So again, the beauty of the Greenland trips is it isn't a cookie cutter type of expedition. We don't have to necessarily be in a specific area at a specific time. Of course, we want to make sure that meals are respected, but apart from that, we have that luxury to play around with time, especially when it comes to photography. And Greenland is one of the best places for landscape photography. There are so many textures, there's so much composition. The lighting at midnight, at 1 in the morning, is so special that it is very much somewhere I love to bring out my lens. Now, speaking of photo gear, for anyone who's wondering, generally what we recommend is one telephoto lens and one landscape lens. Of course, this depends on what you want and how you're shooting, what your equipment is. Generally, this is what I bring. Of course, some people like to bring a mid-size lens of any kind, but we have to think about packing because, of course, we're taking helicopters, we're in smaller planes. Once we get to base camp, of course, there is tons of space for all of your needs. However, we want to make sure that we're packing efficiently and intelligently. Also, keeping in mind that when we're on the landscape, when we're going to be hiking, if we're hiking for 2 hours, you have all of that gear on your back. So having a telephoto lens and some sort of landscape lens is great, or a mid lens, for example, 100 to 400 millimeter is also something that a lot of people like to use. Now, beyond that, to keep your gear nice and safe, rain covers are very, very strongly recommended. As I mentioned, the weather can change very, very quickly. Because of that, we want to make sure that your lenses are staying nice and dry. Humidity can be an issue sometimes, but generally speaking, as long as you're taking care and drying out your lenses or have a rain cover, you'll be more than fine. Batteries. Oh my gosh, I cannot emphasize enough. Make sure you have enough batteries and probably a few extras. There are no USB ports or electrical outlets in the rooms. However, in the yurt, there are power bars where we share and we rotate, making sure that our devices are charged. So that is something to keep in mind, of course, whether that is charging your cell phone or your camera batteries. But if you are a photographer or you're someone who just is interested in taking pictures, having those extra batteries can really come in handy. If, for example, you forgot to charge one or another one before going to bed, that just means the following day you have an extra set on you in case you need them. SD cards, of course, I can't emphasize this enough. It's always nice to have extra SD cards just in case. If you have an SD protective case, that also helps quite a bit. Of course, in terms of your gear and everything like that, when we're out in the Zodiacs, we try to keep it as dry as possible. A lot of people bring covers for their bags. It's something that I do highly recommend. Generally speaking, the bottom of the Zodiac doesn't get inundated with water. That's not the goal anyway. But when we're out there on the land, if we're going to be on the boat for an hour and it starts raining, it's really, really important to have wonderful little dry bags with you. We also do supply dry bags when we get to base camp for all of your needs in case you don't have them yourself. We do have a limited amount, but they are large enough that you can fit most of your packs or other type of gear in there. And on that note, there's a lot of equipment that is involved with this trip, of course. In terms of dry suits, in terms of those packs that I just mentioned. Those are all things that we offer to you when we get the base camp and that you return to us before you leave. Now, other things that are great for photo expeditions, of course, is a lens cleaning kit. Some people have very extensive ones. Mine is very minimal. I like to take up the least amount of space possible, but something to clean your lens is always good. And of course, silica packets or something along those lines. I mentioned that sometimes there can be downpours. If your lenses are going to get wet or anything like that, it's great to have a silica pack to be able to then absorb any humidity or moisture that may have potentially gotten into your equipment. Now, beyond that, of course, the photo tours, we have wonderful photo expedition leaders who are some of the best in the industry. I'm lucky to call a lot of them friends and colleagues. And regardless of whether or not you're on a nature journey tour or a photo journey tour, um, those expeditions are great. And there's always an opportunity for photography around every corner. Whether we're in the boats, for example, looking for whales, a telephoto lens is always great to have. Whether or not we're at base camp, just taking pictures of the sunset, there's always so many opportunities at every corner. It then just becomes a question of gear management and what you want to bring out onto the land with you, what you want to keep at base camp. And of course, your expedition leaders and guides are there to very much help guide you throughout that process. Now, I hope that this has inspired some of you to come join us. I am very excited for the season to come. Of course, there's always a few little extra pieces that we add on once we get into Greenland, but it is such a special, special place. It demands respect, it demands responsibility, and it is one of the more physically demanding expeditions that we have in our roster across the world. But if you have the means to do it, if you have the mentality that comes with it, this is a special, special place. Because as I mentioned, there are no typical days. Sometimes we go in with a certain strategy, completely flip it over, and end up with something else. But at the end of the day, there's no place like it on the planet. It is rugged, it is wild, and it is so amazing to me every time I go back to see the people who live there, who enjoy, and not only enjoy, but very much flourish in that environment. And I do hope that we see a few of you either this coming summer or the summer next. With that, I'm going to hand it over back to Brooke, as I'm sure there are probably a few questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Anthony. Man, just like we were talking about before we went live, this destination is so high on my list, and I'm so excited for everybody who's going to come out and join you this season. All right, everybody, we have time for Q&A, which is fantastic for about the next 15-ish minutes. We'll see how many we can go through. In your control panel, there's a little question box there. Go ahead and dump those in, and we will see how many we can get through. Alrighty, let's begin. Anthony, could you elaborate a little bit more on how much climbing or like trekking there is on ice? And are there any steep hills?
Yeah, that's a very, very great question. Generally speaking, we're not walking on ice all that much. In fact, the image that you see before you here is our glacier walk that we try to do on the very last day that we're in Greenland or next to it. So we're only on there for a portion of the day. Of course, we have specialized equipment to do so. Depending on the landscape and depending how the ice has shifted year after year, we try to go to the same area. It generally tends to have a little bit of a steep incline at the very beginning. We get out of the boats, we have to go up a steep rocky incline and then a relatively steep icy incline. Again, we take our time, we make sure that everyone is comfortable with that, and then we walk on a relatively flat surface like you see here. Of course, we also try to go in and around the ice, which can demand, certain technical aspects that come with it, which is why we have an experienced mountain guide who's there with us. Now, beyond the ice, in terms of the different types of hikes that we do and the trails, overall, not necessarily a very steep factor. However, we have to keep in mind that it can be very rugged, it can be very uneven, very wet as well. Of course, we have trails that we've used in the past. Sometimes, if certain areas are blocked, we'll try to go to a different location. Our guides are very experienced in terms of reading the terrain, reading what's happening around, but of course, also relating that to the needs and strengths of the group. All that to say that it varies quite a bit. For walking on ice specifically, though, it's only really this glacier walk specifically. Beyond that, we don't go walk on any glaciers around base camp or anything like that. We really stick to dry land as much as possible. And by dry land, I really do mean that kind of rocky kind of landscape. So sometimes those trails can be anywhere between a mile to a few miles. We're not going on any 40-mile treks or anything like that. Although I would personally love to do that, we just simply don't have time. And of course, it would just detract from certain other activities. So there is a combination of relatively low lying land, but there also can be some steep slopes.
Great, thank you. Next, could you elaborate on exactly what gear will be provided from like a clothing standpoint? Like what the parkas, that suit that you talked about, what will be there for people and maybe what is the temperature rating and what should people be prepared to bring as well from home?
Absolutely. That is a great question because the PDBs do an excellent job at listing all of that, but it's sometimes hard to piece all that puzzle. When you arrive at base camp, we offer a couple of different suits. So we have those survival suits that we talked about for the Zodiacs, which are incredibly warm. They're very nice and thick. Usually, when people are on the Zodiacs, they'll adorn themselves in the survival suits. Underneath that, they're still wearing a base layer, a mid layer, maybe even a top layer. It can get quite warm in them if it's nice and sunny out. If it's cold, however, it's nice to have those layers underneath. Now, of course, for pants as well, that means that people are wearing, a base layer, potentially just an outer layer underneath the survival suit. Once we get onto land and we take those survival suits off, usually people have a coat packed inside their bag, or they'll have some rain gear as well. So that's typically what's happening when we're on the Zodiacs. Beyond that, as you may have seen in the paddling pictures, everyone had what we call dry suits on. So those dry suits are actually quite thin. They're not as thick as the survival suits that we see from the Zodiacs. But given the fact that we're doing physical activity, we do warm up quite well inside them. Underneath that, people are usually wearing a base layer or mid layer. I'm someone who runs very hot, for example. So when I am paddling underneath that dry suit, I usually only have on my base layers because I do get quite warm. Again, we're not going to go out if there's a snowstorm or a torrential downpour. We typically tend to go out when everything is nice and calm. If there is a little bit of rain coming down, that's okay. They're called dry suits for a reason, but they very much allow you to have that kind of ability to paddle without too much restricted movement. But underneath, having a wonderful kind of base layer, mid layer is something that is definitely key. Beyond that, hats, mittens are always good things to have. I mentioned how the weather changes dramatically. Sometimes it can feel very chilly. We can experience, temperatures as low as 35 degrees Fahrenheit, sometimes even lower, depending on what's happening at that particular time of the year. Sometimes it can go above 60, 70. There have been trips where one day I'm in a t-shirt and shorts at base camp because it is really warm. And then the following day, I have on my base layers, I have on my mid layers, I have on my outer layers and my rain gear. So when you get to base camp, we will absolutely give you one of those survival suits for the Zodiacs. We'll give you one of those dry suits, and those very much become your suits for the duration of the expedition. We also give you a dry bag, as I mentioned. Usually it is a 40-liter or something bigger, depending on what your needs are. And of course, there are some other little technical pieces of equipment that we give you, for example, neoprene boots, neoprene gloves for paddling, for example. But that is generally the kind of big pieces of equipment that people will be given when they're at base camp.
Perfect. And continuing down that same train of thought, I have lots of questions about shoes and boots. Could you elaborate on what somebody should bring from home then, boot wise?
Yeah, absolutely. Footwear is one of the most important thing, is it not? Now, of course, hiking boots are great to have. Generally speaking, we're trying to keep our feet dry as much as possible. Having a waterproof boot is always a good thing to do. When we're out on the land, we don't cross any big rivers or anything like that. Sometimes we'll hop over a tiny little creek or something like that, or we'll be walking through some more kind of moist terrain because there are some very small wetlands here and there. Um, so having a waterproof boot is a very important piece of the puzzle in your expedition. Beyond that, when you're at base camp, having comfortable footwear is really nice to have. We actually do offer Crocs, believe it or not. They're very comfortable to have, and they just allow everyone to not bring in too much dirt and soil when they're walking around base camp. It also allows the land to kind of not be impeded on too much. But having slippers is always something that's good that people like to have, or just comfortable shoes when you're out and about. Muck boots are something that some people like to have. If you have comfortable muck boots that you don't mind hiking in for multiple hours, that's also good. For those of you who are unaware of what muck boots are, they're typically mid-calf to knee-high boot that has some neoprene and rubber. A lot of the expedition leaders like to have them. Those are kind of my go-to when I'm out there because it allows me to be able to stomp through, some muddier or more wet areas. Of course, we as expedition leaders tend to sacrifice ourselves and get our feet wet a little bit more to allow people to help them over a rock or something along those lines. But generally speaking, beyond that, you want to make sure that whatever boots you have good grip on them. That is so incredibly important because we're on uneven terrain, because of the potential of wet, slippery rocks. Generally speaking, though, what we see is people in their hiking boots most of the time when we're out and about. When we're in the kayaks, we actually have those little neoprene boots. So you're not wearing running shoes, you're not wearing hiking boots. Those are little neoprene boots that we offer you at base camp once you arrive. Hope that answers your question.
Yeah, no, that was very helpful. Continuing on about the itinerary itself, I'll just combine these questions. So,
Hmm.
how many nights does each group spend at base camp, and how big is a group for both the nature journey and the photo trip?
Yeah, absolutely. Those are fantastic questions. So, typically speaking, and again, we said that nothing is always typical, we aim for 4 nights at base camp. That is what the itinerary is logged in as. Of course, we're in Tasiilaq the first 2 nights, then we're at base camp for 4 nights, then we're in Kulusuk for a night. That is when the weather cooperates, and it does the vast majority of the time. So we very much spend 4 beautiful nights at base camp. Groups typically do not go above 11 people. This can vary a little bit, but that is generally the numbers that we're looking at. Of course, we're at a base camp. We want to make sure that everything is small, nice, and intimate. So we're not looking at big groups of 40, 50 people. For the photo journeys, we're looking at roughly about the same size of group, give or take a couple of numbers. So just to recap, we fly into Greenland, we go straight to Tasiilaq where we're there for 2 nights, we go to base camp for 4 nights, then we come back and we're in Kulusuk for a night. That is typically what happens. Of course, if weather comes in and it becomes too dangerous to fly or to be on the water when we have to be on the boats, that can change, of course. And again, that is part of the adventure. It's part of the expedition. It has happened in the past that certain flights have been delayed and then we've had to come up with a different strategy. But we try to maximize our time at base camp as much as possible throughout that itinerary.
Great, thank you. Next here, we have lots of good ones coming in. Oh,
Hmm.
I think this is a fun one. Is there an opportunity for somebody to do a polar plunge if they're interested in getting in the water?
The famous polar plunge. Of course there is. Of course there is. It's one of the things that we love to do at camp. So we do polar plunges right from the rocks at base camp. If we're lucky, there's usually an iceberg or two around just to kind of give it that extra flair. And I can honestly say I have done many different polar plunges. I like to pride myself on my Canadian blood, allowing me to enjoy some of the cold water. And it is probably one of the coldest cold plunges I have ever done in my life. It is a lot of fun. So yes, there is that opportunity.
Ah, fantastic. That does sound really fun. I'd have to talk myself up to do that. But if somebody's asking, that means that they're interested too, which is great.
Yeah,
I'm
and
glad
what's
that's
great
a
is we always
yes.
have hot chocolate or a warm drink ready to go afterwards.
Fantastic. That sounds so fun. Great. So could you be a little bit more specific? How often are polar bears actually seen on trips?
Yes, that is a great question. It's one that we often get. To be very frank, not very often. In fact, we typically don't want to see the polar bears. The reason for that is we are a small group that is unsupported on the land. So we generally don't expect to see them. We don't really want to see them from a safety point of view. Of course, if we hear about one in the area, we'll keep our eyes peeled, but we don't go out seeking polar bears. That is not the goal of this expedition by any means. We'll hear of one, maybe 2 or 3 sightings a year, but again, that can vary very much from one year to another. So the chances are quite minimal and quite low. Greenland is an expansive, expansive country. As you can see by this picture, there's so much area to cover. But of course, that also changes kind of our plans sometimes. If we do know that there's a polar bear around, of course, our safety guidelines kick in. And again, safety is the most paramount responsibility that we have. So we don't go out seeking polar bears. We're not trying to find them. It does happen from time to time, but it is quite rare indeed.
And also, from a sighting standpoint, how often are northern lights seen?
Yeah, that's also the very big question. Not that often, keeping in mind that at the time of the year that we're there, the sun doesn't necessarily set. So for folks who are going earlier in the season, you're seeing a lot of sunlight even at 2 or 3 in the morning, to the point where it becomes very difficult to see northern lights. Because regardless of how strong the lights are, if there's still sunlight out, it'll be very difficult to see them. Trips towards the end of the season might have a better chance. Now, what is the actual opportunities to see them? Of course, if they're out, we're at base camp. Of course, people just come out of their tents and they can see the lights. That being said, it depends on what's going on with solar radiation at the moment. So, for example, the last 3 days, people may have heard in the news that there's been a lot of geomagnetic storms. Here in southern BC, we've had lights for the last 3 nights. However, in Greenland, it very much depends on what's happening with solar radiation. So, if we happen to be in a week where there's a lot of solar radiation hitting the planet, maybe we will have more opportunities. However, if there are next to no solar storms happening, of course, the chances diminish quite a bit. The great thing about base camp is there is no light pollution. So we have very beautiful opportunities, of course, if everything cooperates in terms of the amount of solar radiation, but also in terms of the weather. If we have a cloudy night, regardless of how strong the lights are, unfortunately, we will not be able to see. So it really depends on many different factors. But the moral of the story here is, if the lights are out and it is dark outside, it is a beautiful viewing opportunity.
Fantastic. And I have a couple photo questions here.
Mhm.
Let's see, we'll just list them off. So, what is the weight limit for the photo trip? And after that, do you have any recommended lens filters?
I'll start with lens filters first. I am not a human who uses lens filters all that much. I mean, there's so many different trains of thoughts and schools of thoughts when it comes to this. For myself, I don't use them. I have colleagues who do, and that's totally okay. I think that they can be good on days where it is very sunny outside and you're on the water. A polarizing lens can be quite nice. Because it really cuts out that UV and you're able to see through the water. For example, if you're taking images of whales or of ice. That being said, for other uses, not necessarily the thing that I would prioritize myself. I think that depending on how comfortable you are with your settings, you can really easily manage to get some vastly beautiful pictures. Almost every single picture in this presentation is one that I took, like this one, for example, and none of them have any filters on them necessarily. When it comes down to it, my personal school of thought is that you have a wonderful piece of equipment that is your lens, very high quality piece of glass. If you're throwing a filter onto there, you're maybe diminishing that a little bit. Again, everyone has their different school of thought on that. Maybe on the Zodiacs, it could be worth throwing one on. I've seen it happen in the past, and it yields some very nice results, but it's not necessarily the thing I would prioritize the most. But UV filters, anything that's a polarized filter, is probably good to have. For the exact specifications for weight limit, I would have to refer to the PDB. I don't have it on the top of my head, unfortunately, but it is in the literature, and we make sure that it is a weight limit that allows people to have the the amount of gear that they want with them. Of course, tripods become one of the questions. We do have tripods at base camp. Generally speaking, however, when we're out and about, if we're going to go for a long hike, we don't necessarily take them out because of that weight that is then attributed to your back. However, there are pieces of equipment like that that can be made available, especially when we're doing, photography right from base camp. It's nice to have. So for the weight limit specifically, I'd have to refer to the pre-departure briefing.
Well, great. With that, we are getting very close to the top of the hour, so I will wrap up the Q&A for now, and I will turn it to you, Anthony, for any last closing comments.
Brooke, thank you so much, and thank you everybody. It would be so easy to spend so many hours talking about Greenland in all of its beauty. Unfortunately, we only have an hour, but what I can say is that it is absolutely one of my favorite expeditions because, again, it really has its roots in pure adventure touring. It's a special place, and beyond just the landscape, the animals, the different types of things that we see out there, the people that we meet in Greenland are also what makes it so special. We kind of glanced over cultural encounters, but being able to talk with people who've been living on this land and whose families have been living on this land for such a long time is, to me, one of the most amazing things beyond just the vast, beautiful landscape and just the sheer towering pieces of ice that you have around us. Greenland is one of those places that, in my personal opinion, helps us reflect on our past and our present and our future. And I do hope that if you're already signed up for this adventure or if you're thinking about it, that when you do come, you really feel what it is to be in Greenland. So with that, thank you everybody. Thank you for tuning in and hopefully see you soon.
Yes, Anthony, thank you so much for the fantastic presentation today. And I would like to thank everybody who tuned in. Join us tomorrow for our next daily dose of nature. You can check out this week's lineup, including registration links, on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation, and we will have the replay available on our website soon. With that, I will conclude the webinar. Goodbye, everybody.